Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for attending this webinar session. My name is George Braddock, and I'm the Director of Creative Housing Solutions based out of Eugene, Oregon. And today is the first of 4 webinar presentations being sponsored by the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities in the state of New York. And I'd like to start off by expressing my gratitude and appreciation to the New York Office for People with Developmental Disabilities for their wonderful support of this project. In particular, I want to express my appreciation to Dr. Lucinda Grant Griffin for her unending support of our work and helping us come to the point where we're able to do these 4 presentations for you over the next couple of months. Neither the state of New York nor Creative Housing Solutions receive compensation in any way for those materials that are presented or mentioned in this presentation. So the first session today is going to be entitled The Environment Matters. And the goal is to basically present the case that the physical environment matters tremendously in the lives of all of us, but in particular it matters to people with developmental disability. But somehow we go about life believing that we just sort of have this intrinsic relationship that just works out with environments, that we just sort of know how to use them, and that environments therefore are sort of neutral and almost passive. And I'm going to make the case that quite the opposite is true, that environments actually have a tremendous and dramatic effect on how we live our lives. Everything from limiting our choices to really making it possible for us to live the kind of lives that we want to live. The second session is going to talk about broken environments. And so this is homes that do not work. And some of the characteristics of those homes, we're going to look at how to deal with issues around broken windows or flooded bathrooms or doors that get slammed. So there's some strategies that look at places that haven't worked out so well, but we're not just going to leave you dangling there. We're going to provide you with some information about construction assemblies, methods, and materials that will enable you to make these environments change and make them work. The third session is entitled The Caregiver's Environment. And we know that when caregivers break down, when supports aren't there, the whole situation falls apart. So it is as important to take care of the person providing the care, making sure that their lives are safe, reducing their workload, reducing their stress. And when their stress comes down, everything about the environment changes. And so this is really very practical tools for helping keep places clean, helping keep places safe, and also supporting people long-term and being able to remain in that position as caregiver. We particularly are looking at talking about families. As you know, 80% of people with autism spectrum disorder are still living in their family homes. And as parents age and situations change, we need to be able to kind of continue to support those arrangements as long as they make sense to the people that are living in them. And a big part of that is supporting that family, supporting that structure that makes it possible for people to remain in their homes together. The final session is the autism-friendly environment. And in this case, we begin to think about what are the characteristics of a home that really make sense for most people experiencing autism spectrum disorder. Now, the fact is that the majority of people with that diagnosis are going to be able to do perfectly well in conventionally available housing, provided they have the right kinds of supports. But for some people, that's going to actually prove to be a failure because their environments don't support them. Their environments weren't built for the way they live their lives and the way they're experiencing the world. But we're going to introduce you to what we call the 6 most common modifications to environments. So over 31 years of doing this work and almost 1,500 projects, there are 6 things that we do again and again consistently. And they're person-centered in that we end up tweaking them, but you're going to be introduced to things such as the walking loop, the essential bathroom, the connected home, layers of freedom and places of control, and tools for good housekeeping. So I like to think of myself as an advocate for the physical environment. And the environment matters. And this is, as I say, it's often underestimated in the role that it plays in supporting people. So over the years, I've had an opportunity to sit in on an awful lot of IEPs, IPPs, person-centered plans. And unless the individual that we're working with has very particular physical disabilities, it is quite unusual for the physical environment to come up as part of the conversation. It's back to that assumption that I talked about, that physical environments are sort of neutral, and we just sort of apply ourselves to them and everything works out. But in fact, physical environments are a greater predictor of behavior than even personality. A very famous psychologist named Roger Barker spent several years in a little town in Kansas looking at how people acted in various environments. So he went to churches and to schools and in elevators, on buses, in stores. And what he found out was that people's actions and how they responded in physical environments was more controlled by the setting itself than it was by their personality. People have behaviors relative to the environment. So it is very important to remember that environments can enable us or they can disable us. Judith Snow, who is a very famous advocate, and she talks about the fact that she says, my body can do almost nothing. And then she goes on to say that she believes that really it is her physical environment that has disabled her. So in many cases, disability is really a consequence of living and trying to live in an environment that doesn't work. So there are 4 things that I'd like people to take away from today's session. These are the 4 key concepts. And the first one is, people enter into a relationship with their physical environment for better or for worse. And I'm going to talk a lot about how that is true. And it's pretty easy to see when environments don't work. And we're going to try to offer some suggestions about how to change those environments so that they do begin to work. The second one is the difference between a problem behavior and a preferred activity are the consequences. So what we're looking at here is beginning to try to introduce some different ways of thinking about the environment, different ways to think about people's relationship with that environment. And it's sometimes rethinking what is the problem behavior and beginning to unwrap it and see what's really at work. And sometimes it's not so much the behavior itself as it is the consequences of that behavior. The third thing is you cannot fix a problem behavior in a broken environment. Again, this begins to talk about the impact of stress on caregivers. When environments are broken, it creates an atmosphere of stress. It creates anxiety. It sort of has a way of kind of tumbling on itself. So once things begin to fall apart, once things are damaged, the tendency is for them to either remain that way or to become more damaged over time. And the 4th concept is, if the environment doesn't work, it's not the person's fault. It's not the person's fault. Sometimes it's really easy to blame people for things because they're not using the bathroom the way they should be, or they're closing the door harder than they should. So it's pretty simple to say, this is really your fault that this is happening or not happening for you. It is impossible to conduct a valid study of human behavior outside of the context in which that behavior takes place. So you look at some of these pictures here, and it's perfectly reasonable to take your shirt off in the middle of the winter at an Oregon football game and act completely outrageous. But if you did that in the Safeway store, they might call the authorities. So very much so, it's important to always be thinking about context. And over my 31 years experience doing this work, a great deal of the work I've done has been talking to people who were leaving institutions, state institutions for people with very significant disabilities. And I would go to those institutions and I would meet with staff and I would look at records and I'd meet the individuals. And oftentimes they came with these really sort of interesting dossiers. And I remember one man in particular that they said he was sort of a burly guy. And by that, they meant that whenever you approached him, he always sort of looked, kind of disheveled. He looked a little angry. He often had saliva on his clothes and on his face. When you get too near him, he'd hiss at you. He would kind of bare his teeth. So he was a sort of unpleasant person to be around. And they said, oh yeah, you got to be really careful because sometimes he'll bite you or he'll try to pinch you. So we try to think about some of the things we might do in his home that would support him coming out with that repertoire of behavior that we were informed that this is how he was. And when we moved him into his new home, and I went to visit him, what was really interesting is that none of those behaviors were present in his new home. That the sort of aggressiveness and the saliva on his clothes and the sort of acting like he was going to attack you had all gone away. And I came to the conclusion that he had developed those strategies, he had developed that way of being as a response to the environment that he was in. Because in that environment, those behaviors kept him safe and made it possible for him to exist there. And I don't know what any of us might do placed in a setting like that, where there's nothing person-centered about it, was really more about just maintaining people's living than it was having people have real lives. So understanding that context, and that happened again and again, where very often the behaviors that people were famous for, they got left behind when the physical environment changed. And there's a larger and larger body of information that is beginning to help us understand that habits of various kinds are really attached to the places in which they occur. So when you think about a situation and you think about people and their behaviors, it's always contextual. It's always contextual. So this is kind of an odd slide, and I have a story that goes with this. So the very first projects that I did in terms of supporting people with disability moving into community and into small settings was part of a thing called nursing home reform in Oregon. In 1984, we moved some folks from a nursing home in Florence into a residential 5-person group home in Eugene. And one of the people we moved, her name was Tracy. And when I first met Tracy, went over to meet her at the nursing home, and I was talking to her about what we were doing, and Tracy said, "Oh, I want to have my own place and I want to have a dog." I said, "Well, I'm here to offer you a bedroom in a 5-person group home, and you can't have a pet." And she said, "Oh, that was okay," because she knew that sooner or later she was going to get what she wanted. And she did. And she showed a lot of patience, and 5 years later, she got an opportunity to move into the Southtown apartments, into the accessible unit. So I was very excited. So Tracy used a wheelchair, had very foreshortened legs and arms, but had a lot of capacity as well. And I'll never forget the day we first went to visit her new apartment and got out of the van and headed up to the front door, and there was a lever lock and the low threshold ramp, and we moved into the apartment, and the hallways were a little wider. There were 3-foot doors into the bedrooms and into the bathroom. In the bedroom, the closet rod had been lowered. We went into the bathroom, and there was the high-rise toilet and the wall-hung sink and the grab bars all around. And we went into the kitchen, and there was a mirror above the range. And that was it. That was it. This was the accessible apartment. Tracy was delighted. She could have her dog. So she moved in. And every day, somebody had to come to help Tracy do her toilet. And it was about an hour and a half in the morning and about another hour and a half every night. And after a while, we began to understand what Tracy's capacities were, and we figured out a way to convert her bathroom so that she could actually do those things herself. So we went to the state and we said, "We need $5,000 to convert Tracy's bathroom so that she can do things herself." And the state says, "Well, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for environmental modifications." But they did have money to send somebody every single day for the rest of Tracy's life to help her do something that she could do herself. So we were sort of determined, because Tracy was so determined to do things for herself, and so we did this remodel, and if we'd had the $5,000, we would have used some different materials. But ultimately what this meant was that Tracy could actually use this bathroom herself, and that platform would fold down and she could transfer to the platform, and then she had the capacity to scoot. She had dexterity. Had a seat that connected to the bottom of the tub that was powered by water from the faucet, and Tracy could do this herself. Now, whenever you talk about making environmental modifications related to physical disability, it's sort of pretty pragmatic stuff. It's pretty simple thinking. You just sort of say, well, okay, what is it a person can do? What's the barrier to them being able to use it? And then move ahead. But when you start thinking about people whose issues may be more cognitive, who may have different relationships with the environment, where the communication is a greater problem, the solutions are not as simple, but the effect can be as profound. The effect can be as profound. So what we learned is that although accessibility issues are pretty well understood and actually generally fairly easily solved, people that were talking about making environmental modifications around people with issues around cognitive disabilities, it's not as well known, and in many cases it's not as appreciated. Again, back to this idea that the environment is neutral and therefore not really a factor. If one of the principles that I was asking you to take away with today was this idea that if the environment doesn't work, it's not the person's fault. And in this slide, it's pretty obvious that when you see the young man sitting below the stairs in his wheelchair, you don't think that he needs to find a way to get up that wheelchair himself. You don't blame him for not being able to go up those set of stairs. You would say, well, he needs a ramp or he needs an elevator. He needs some kind of environmental modification to make it possible for him to go up those stairs and to use his environment. The picture of the toilets That's a little bit different, kind of a different question. And the question there might be, what if a person can't use those toilets? Or won't use those toilets? Or even put yourself in that position, could you use those toilets? So it may not be that you don't have the physical capacity to use those toilets or the capability, but there may be things about using toilets in that setting. And what's the first thing that has to happen to use a toilet? You have to be able to relax. And I don't know about you, but I would have a really hard time relaxing in that particular environment. Even though there is the anti-fall seizure setup on one of the toilets. So it's kind of using that same idea and saying, you know, this man can't go up those stairs. And there are plenty of people who can't use those toilets. And it's not just because of physical barriers to doing it, it's because of other things, about the inability to integrate sensation, to deal with all of the stimulus that are related to that. People enter into relationships with the physical environments for better or for worse. And I think that in many ways this is a fairly easy thing to understand because we all know about relationships. And you know, we have relationships that are good and bad relationships. We have relationships that are problematic. We have relationships that we're stuck with. And in many cases, the relationship that we have with our home, we're sort of stuck with the way it's laid out. We're sort of stuck with the way the bathroom is organized. We're sort of stuck with the way the kitchen is put together. And being neuronormals and being adaptive like human beings are, we generally make do. And we make things work out for us. But for some people, that kind of ability to influence and to create their environments is less present. And in fact, you find that they're going to more react to the situations than they are going to create them. But the bathroom on the left there is a bathroom with which, you know, Colin has a really good relationship. He has a really good relationship. So when Colin first moved into this house, he was a person that couldn't use a toilet, didn't use a toilet. So we worked on some strategies that would encourage Colin to use the toilet. And one of them was when he sat down on that toilet, it would turn on that television set and play his favorite movie. So over time, we developed a pattern of Colin being able to come in and sit down on the toilet and watch his movie. And when he got up off the toilet, the movie would go out. And over some time, Colin began to sit on the toilet and first to urinate and then ultimately to use the toilet. So this is an environmental situation that worked for him. And you can see there were a whole bunch of strategies at work that helped Colin make sense out of this whole toileting experience, to support a routine, to help him use the toilet in the right way. And what was interesting about this bathroom is that because Colin became used to certain things in the bathroom, later on, one of the things that happened was, you know, Colin developed some cataracts in his eyes, and he needed to have drops placed in his eyes. And it was a really difficult thing to get Colin to sit down and put his head back and put drops in his eyes. But because we had built this little seat alongside of the sink where Colin would be shaved and do his toilet, he was already used to sitting down in that area and having things happen around him. So we put a little pillow on the wall that came down, he could put his head back. We put a little spinner on the ceiling. And over a few weeks, we created a situation where Colin could sit down and put his head back and let staff put drops in his eyes. So this is a way that the physical environment created a situation where Colin could ultimately have it work for him in a way that allowed staff to put the drops in his eyes. Now this bathroom, this is a bad relationship with this bathroom. There's been holes kicked in the tile, the walls have been broken down. And these are environments that aren't working. These are environments that are broken. So there's an old Leo Kottke song, and it says, I owe it all to Pamela Brown. And when I think about Anna and Anna's family, I often think that I owe it all to Anna. So as you can see, we began working with Anna in 1994. So I've known Anna for over 20 years. And it has been such a wonderful experience, you know, getting to know her family, and to being part of this long conversation with Anna, and how the physical environment continued to first support Anna to live successfully at home, and then ultimately to have the kind of satisfying life that she wanted, to achieve some of those values that we talked about earlier on. I got a letter from Anna's parents, and they said, we love our daughter, and we want her to remain with us. She was 7 years old. But she only sleeps 3 times a day for about 40 minutes, and we're up all the time. And the house is taking on a lot of damage, and Mom said it begins to look like a war zone around here. And they said, we have to do something, or we can't keep doing it anymore. And her dad wrote, vigilance and duct tape aren't enough anymore. And he said, Anna has begun to test the strength of materials. But isn't that great language? I mean, I go to places and the document will say, engages in severe property destruction, kicks holes in the walls. And that sort of sets a way of thinking about it. But when you say, test the strength of materials, it kind of defuses that, and it takes some of the blame out of it. And it's just a wonderful way to begin to think about it. And the language that we use when we talk about environments and about people's relationships with environments is really, really critical. So the first thing that was happening with Anna is that she began banging on the windows. She's getting bigger, she's getting faster, she's getting stronger, her dad writes. And the front window of the house was in danger of being broken. In fact, the first windows that got broken were alongside of her bed because she could lay down on her bed and turn and use her feet to kick the window and break the glass in the window. So they ended up screwing plexiglass over the window. And plexiglass worked. I mean, it got the job done. If you were going to protect Anna from breaking the window, plexiglass would do that job. But it also didn't look very good. And this is back to Mom saying, you know, our house begins to look like a war zone. So we replaced that window with tempered glass, which is very strong and looks like it belongs in a house. So safety must come first. You have to be safe and healthy in your home. And so his dad writes, Anna has begun to experiment with gravity. And what that meant was she was throwing the furniture in the house and breaking holes in the walls and breaking the lights in the house. And so we came in and did lights that had protective coverings over them so that they wouldn't be damaged. Anna takes hours of baths every single day. She spends hours playing with water. And that meant it was really important for Anna to be safe and for the parents' stress level to be low enough that Anna wasn't going to get into a situation where she was going to turn on all hot water and scald herself or burn herself. So a tempering valve was installed on the hot water heater. Anna doesn't use the toilet. And remember, as we're kind of thinking about environments at work, and that slide we looked at the young man in the wheelchair at the staircase, and that we didn't blame him for that. And it was really obvious that he couldn't go up those stairs. And it wasn't really a matter of wouldn't, it was that he couldn't. And in Anna's case, the question became around toileting, is it that Anna can't use the toilet, just as that young man couldn't go up those set of stairs? Or was it that Anna won't use the toilet? And the answer is actually a mixture of those two things. Anna doesn't use the toilet because she cannot integrate all of the sensory experiences that happen to her in the toileting experience. So first of all, this toilet is kind of claustrophobic, and Anna doesn't like spaces that are closed like that. And she's very tactile sensitive. It's very difficult for Anna to integrate tactile and sensory input into her system. So it's like she's doing a lot of sensory overload. So when you think about a toilet, it's cold, there's a different temperature, there's these sounds that are involved in it. You have to turn your back and sit down as an act of faith that the toilet will still be there when you sit down. So all of those barriers made it impossible, actually made it to where Anna couldn't use the toilet. And when we began to unwrap that behavior, when you began to unwrap and you started to say, you know, it's not Anna's fault. It's not Anna's fault. She can't. And here are the reasons she can't. And so let's begin to address those. So we heated the toilet seat. We expanded the space around where the toilet was. We heated the floor. We changed the configuration so that her placards that helped her get through the process were present. And over time, Anna began to use the toilet. But the reality is that she couldn't use that toilet as it was, and that she could use this one. So Anna loved water. And from the very beginning, her mom says that when Anna was a little child, water had to be running on her food in order for her to eat it. Water calmed Anna. And I find this is a really common characteristic in many of the people that I work with autism, that the whole ability to manipulate, to handle, to play with water. Sue Rubin, who's a person with autism who helps us communicate, talks about her spoons under the water, and she says, I let the autism take me. And very often, water shows up again and again. And when we get into a later session, when we talk about the 6 most common modifications, how water plays into those is a really important part of that conversation. But every day, Mom had to use 20 or 30 towels to mop up the excess water in the bathroom. And the bathroom took severe damage. And when we went to do the remodel, you can see the kinds of damage that the water had done. So environments that don't work, they increase the workload on caregivers. Environments that don't work increase stress on everybody. So Anna, we've learned, loved the bath. In fact, she loved everything that had to do with water. And more than anything, she wanted to spend hours and hours in the bathroom playing with water and experience water. And when she did, in the center slide here, you can see the kind of damage that happened. Water got in between the tub and the floor and dry rotted. The floor had already been replaced 3 times. There was mold in the tiles. They had to put plastic up on the ceiling and on the windows because water would splash. The window was regular glass and it could get broken. So this was a bathroom that didn't work. And so whenever Anna was in there, Mom and Dad had to practically be present in order to keep her safe. Her little brother went in there one day and the floor was so soaking wet that he slipped and broke his tooth. So because this environment didn't work, everybody was stressed. Anna wanted to be in that bathroom doing what she most loved to do. If she was denied access to that bathroom because it was too much stress, because the bathroom was damaged, then Anna began to lash out. You know, she wanted what she wanted and didn't understand why she couldn't be in there. And for Mom, it just meant a tremendous amount of work. So going through and making some environmental modifications to that bathroom that made it work. A tempered glass mirror, tempered windows to the outside, waterproof lights, epoxy paint, all tile assembly, tile floor, a floor drain, a place for Anna's toys that was easy to maintain. And when we did this job, Anna, I think I've emphasized, didn't like change. The family went away to the coast for a week, and we did the bathroom. And one of the things that we knew about Anna was that she loved the color blue. And the color actually makes a lot of difference in people's lives. But she loved the color blue. And so when she came home and the family came home, we weren't sure how she was going to react to the fact that this bathroom has been completely changed. It's completely changed. And they came in, and Anna immediately went to the shower and went to the tub and turned it on and started playing with water. Water spilled out onto the floor, and it went down the floor drain. And the whole family stood around the floor drain and watched the water run down the floor drain like it was a campfire. Because it meant that suddenly the conversation had really changed, that Anna could use that bathroom the way she wanted, and it wasn't going to do any damage, and people weren't going to get hurt. So it was really an important time for the family. So Anna bounced on the furniture, and she bounced on her bed. And that meant that she broke the bed, and she often broke the couches. So it was a routine where every few months the family would go to the Goodwill and get a new couch and bring it into the house, and over a few weeks or months, Anna would bounce on the furniture and break it. So you would say, Anna bouncing on the furniture is a problem behavior. But if you begin to unwrap that and you say, what was really the problem? Well, the problem was that the furniture was broken. It wasn't necessarily the problem that Anna needed to experience the big muscle movement and that vestibular stimulation that came from bouncing on the furniture. What she needed was furniture that she could bounce on that she didn't break. So we've found ourselves some university high jump crash pads, and Mom made some nice blankets and throws for it and some nice pillows stitched on it. And now Anna could bounce on that furniture. And we did the same thing in her bed. So when you get down to it, it was really the consequence of the furniture being broken, not necessarily the behavior of Anna wanting to bounce on the furniture. Temple Grandin talks about the need for the squeeze machine. And for very often people with autism, it's like they need to kind of get back into their bodies, and that motion helps them do it. This is about thinking creatively and looking at different opportunities. So around the yard, there was a huge arborvitae hedge. The problem with arborvitae is it's poisonous. It's poisonous. And so I often do workshops, and Anna is sometimes the subject of that workshop. And whenever I present this to people in the workshop, almost invariably, one of the first things they do is cut down the hedge. And they cut down the hedge because it's a life and safety issue, right? If Anna gets at the hedge, consumes the hedge, gets poisoned, somebody's going to take a fall for this. So they cut the hedge down. The problem is the hedge provided incredible privacy to Anna's yard. It made it comfortable and safe for her to be out there. So what the strategy that ultimately emerged is we built a fence around the inside of the arborvitae hedge that kept Anna from accessing the arborvitae hedge and consuming it. And you can oftentimes use this as a justification. This is actually an intervention, if you think about it in a certain way, to prevent Anna from doing something that might hurt her. And so oftentimes you can get funding and you can get support to make these kinds of modifications. Things change over time. So as I said earlier, I have had the privilege of having a very long relationship with Anna, more than 20 years. And she continued to evolve. And along the way, one of the things that happened is that she really never stopped loving to play with water. But the way she did it changed. And the impact of that water play over years began to have some pretty detrimental effects on the house. There was so much water running down against the house that it was beginning to undermine the foundation. So there were a lot of problems that evolved around Anna's continued play. But another thing that happened is Anna began using some medication called Depakote. And Depakote will quite often result in people putting on a lot of weight. For Anna, it was a tremendous boom to her being able to be more present in the world, to deal with the inconsistencies and the stresses and the anxieties and the changes that happened, made it possible for her to be more in her community. It was an incredible good thing for Anna, but one of the side effects was Anna put on a lot of weight. And she'd always walked on her toes and began to have a lot of stress on her legs and knees. And ultimately, Anna now spends more and more time in a wheelchair. But still loves to access her backyard. So you can see how some of the characteristics, Anna still loves water, but now she has an opportunity where she's got a garden and garden beds, and she waters those plants. And now she can still access her backyard because there's a wonderful ramp that leads up to the swing that she loves. So things continue to change and the environment continues to evolve. And what people want to do in their environment needs to continue to happen. And the best environments out there continue to be interesting places to be. They continue to encourage you to explore. They continue to be flexible. And they continue to be rich. And so this environment, because of its richness, is really a good place for Anna to live. Anna doesn't like surprises. And Anna needs consistency and predictability in her life. So when we would go up there to work, there was always pictures of all the construction crew. There were specific times that we were going to arrive and specific times when we were going to depart. And all of that was really scheduled. And Anna needed to be on top of that. She needed to be aware of that. So part of when we begin to think about physical environments to support people living the way they want, you have to design into that environment supports that help her manage her routines. And that's everything from what is the schedule for the day, what's going to happen today, to how do we successfully go through the steps in using the toilet. Environments need to be modified to accommodate change. And this is one of the things that I most appreciate about working with this family. So when I first started spending time up there when Anna was about 9 years old, her dad took me out to the garage. And in the garage there were 6 television sets. And he said, all of these television sets have been blown up. And I said, well, what's happened? He said, well, Anna loves water, and Anna will fill her mouth with water, and she will spit it on and into the television set. And she shorts out the television sets. So then he ends up having to go and get more television sets. So what they needed was a waterproof television set. They needed a waterproof entertainment center. We went to Home Depot, we couldn't find one. So we decided we had to build our own, and we built a waterproof entertainment center. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, what you really want is you want that situation. You want Anna accessing the TV and watching the TV in the living room like everybody else. That's where you want to go. You want Anna to develop that capacity. So if what you do is you just lock up the television set and walk away and say the job is done, because in fact we had the waterproof television set. Anna couldn't spit water in it, but that's not what happened. The family insisted that it be unlockable over time. So Anna had various degrees of access to that over time. First it was to her tapes, and then we had a remote, and it began to unwrap, unlock, and Anna developed the capacity. And so when people develop more control, they have to be given more opportunity to exercise it. And I think we fall apart oftentimes in following that through. And the physical environment and changes to it and modifications that allow us to do that help carry that through. So now, Anna watches TV like everybody else. Anna loved her swing. And I think we talked a little bit about the importance of vestibular motion for some people experiencing autism. But somebody came along and said, her swing, she outgrew it. By the time Anna was 15, that little swing just wasn't enough. And it was literally falling apart and it was breaking. So the family went and said, we need some money in order to put in an adult swing. And a caseworker said, well, 15 and 16-year-old girls shouldn't be riding on swings. That's not an age-appropriate activity. We're not going to support and fund putting in a new adult swing for Anna. So they took the swing out. And her mom wrote to me, she said, when they took the swing away, Anna went off. And Anna, it wasn't just a matter of wanting, it's what she needed. But the other thing that's really important and gets left out too often is about bringing joy to people's lives. And I think joy in people's lives is as important as almost anything else that there is. And if the swing brought joy to Anna's life, who are we to judge whether it's appropriate for a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old to ride or swing? If this brings joy, we should do what we can to make it possible for Anna to have that experience and to enjoy that activity. And so as you can see, Anna has an adult swing that works really quite well for her. So, one of the principles that we talk about is as people develop more capacity, it is really important for them to have opportunities to express those capacities. And one of the capacities that Anna developed in all this water play was she was a master at measuring and pouring. I mean, she could absolutely hit it right on at a quarter cup or an eighth of a cup or a cup and a half or whatever it was, because she had been playing with water, measuring it, spooning it out, playing with it for years. And so what kind of activity requires precise measuring? And that is baking. And so I ended up creating a baking center in the kitchen that made sense for Anna, that was organized in a way that worked for her. And every day, Anna baked something for her dessert and for the family. So the environment changed to support activities that Anna wanted to do and that contributed to the overall community and to the household. And then later, the same situation by creating opportunity in the environment for Anna to be able to express herself. She actually had some really interesting capacities as an artist. So the baking center, with a few modifications, could be converted into an artist studio where Anna could play and work with her paints and brushes and do artwork. So the notion that environments need to continue to change and to evolve to support people using them in the way that satisfies them was at work in Anna's life. And we talk a little bit about the idea of environments being coercive. And it's sort of a very strong word, but if you think about a bathroom, for instance, does the bathroom, the way it is organized, actually make sense? Or do we have to use the bathroom the way we do because it is the way it is? And that may sound a little confusing, but the question goes like this. When people first brought toilets into the house, they thought it was really sort of a gross idea. I mean, why would you want to use the toilet in your house? But they really thought about that, and so they put toilets in their own little rooms. There were water closets, and when you needed to use the toilet, you went to the water closet and you used the toilet. But along came American Standard, and along came plumbers, and plumbers said, you know what, I want to put all the water stuff in one place. And so I'm going to come up with a 5x7 bathroom. Well, what is it about the 5x7 bathroom that is somehow ubiquitous, that it is the perfect bathroom? No, it's the perfect bathroom for a plumber, and it's a perfect bathroom for the fact that fixtures that go in the bathroom are designed to go in a 5x7 bathroom, right? So now, in the bathroom, we have the toilet, and we have the shower, and we have the sink. Now, the shower and the sink are hygiene-type based activities. in the sink, you brush your teeth. But then you've got the toilet in here. And when you put the toilet in there, does it actually make sense to brush your teeth in the same room where you use the toilet? And I'm not sure that it does. But culturally, we're good to go with that. We're good to go with that. It doesn't necessarily make sense. And to people with autism, oftentimes those arrangements make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And there's no logic necessarily at work at how you use a space. So continuing to think about how you not coerce behavior, but encourage it and support it so that it happens in a way that makes sense and works for you. And we talked a little bit about, as Anna has gotten older and she's in many ways become more physically disabled, more physically challenged, her home has begun to modify more and more to make it possible for Anna to get around and to continue to do the things that she wants and to use her home in a way that makes sense. So as people change, the environment has to change and the modifications need to happen to make that possible. So beginning in the backyard, a beautiful access ramp to her beloved swing, places along the way for Anna to sit. As she's gotten larger, it's harder for her to get exercise, but it's important that she does. And each one of these things has that also benefit of Anna exercising, and now ultimately access to the front door and use of wheelchairs so that Anna can continue to use and enjoy her home in a way that makes sense and works for her. So one of the things that we ended up providing to Anna is a generator. So the family lives in a location where periodic power disruptions are not that unusual. You know, the electricity goes off. And for you and I, it's an inconvenience. But for Anna, this can be a crisis. Because the various things that she needs to do in order to calm herself when she becomes anxious, they rely on power. They rely on power. And so family ultimately installed a generator, with a switchover box that kept critical things happening in the house for Anna. And it's another way of thinking about, in a way the generator becomes kind of an intervention. And what that does is that prevents Anna from ending up in crisis. So you can almost always make a case for things around health and safety. You can almost always make a case for things related to crisis and the things that you can do to prevent those crises. So the installation of a generator in Anna's home actually was an intervention that prevented Anna ending up in the emergency room. So what about how much does this all cost? And not all of these modifications are necessarily very expensive, but some of them are. But some of them definitely are. So over time, what were the things that we did over this period of time? And you can see we adding windows, making a super bath for Anna, fencing, water play, the entertainment center. So over time, there was $73,000 that were brought to bear in the project, including a design for what happens next. So this has been Autism Awareness Month, and there's been many programs on the television that talking about this wave of adults that are entering the community with autism spectrum disorder and what's going to happen to them and the fear of their families and of their parents of what's going to happen next, what's going to be there when I'm not there. Some of the strategies that are beginning to emerge are this idea of auxiliary dwelling units where you create an apartment that's attached to the house. So the long-range plan for Anna is that Anna will take over the house and mom and dad will move into a remodeled garage that is an apartment. They can remain nearby. The supports that Anna needs can come into the home. So thinking beyond that, there's planning that takes place, and that costs money to think forward and make those kinds of plans. But ultimately, it costs less than $50,000 a year to keep Anna at home. And back when we were originally doing this work, for her to live in a group home would have been in excess of $175,000 because she would require really significant support out of home. And in an institution, even a greater amount of money than that. So not only is it a good decision, not only is it the moral thing to do, not only is it the right thing to do, but from a governmental perspective, it's the economic thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. So if environments don't work, it's not the person's fault. So here we're beginning to hear this little theme song, the 4 things that I was hoping that you would take away with. Environments don't work, it's not the person's fault. It's not their fault. And that very often, your first plan that you have may not work out. Your best effort may not ultimately be the end result, because some folks are going to continue to test that material. Some folks are stronger than others. Some folks have other issues that, take time and take continued adapting to resolve. So started out in Kyle's apartment with pretty regular couch, but Kyle got after that couch over time, and then ultimately evolved to a couch situation that he couldn't hurt. You can't fix a problem behavior in a broken environment. And Kyle really had the tremendous capacity to test the strength of materials. Kyle was very, very strong, and had quite a large, what people might call a behavioral repertoire. Kyle was impressive. I mean, Kyle has a grip that is really among the strongest grip I've ever seen on a human being in my life. He can peel a basketball like that. He can grab a hold of vinyl on the floor and pull it off the floor. He can burrow his way down through a mattress, and he pretty much so eats holes in a mattress like that in about 6 months. And this is regardless of how many mattress covers and stretch fabrics and so forth that Mom puts on the mattress. And they had to put bars over the window in his house, and he would sometimes begin to, in frustration, make holes in the walls. So to try to have a life and to try to work with Kyle to modify some of those behaviors is impossible to do when all you're doing is triage, when all you're doing is trying to patch the next hole in the wall or figure out a way that your son can remain safe when you put bars on the windows. So if you want to change an environment, if you want to change a behavior, if you want to change a behavior, the first thing you need to do is change the environment in which the behavior is taking place. And so that's what began to happen. And we ended up building a little suite of rooms in Kyle's house, and we used the best stuff that we knew at the time, which was a hardboard material with an epoxy paint, and we figured out pretty quickly that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, because Kyle's ability to pick. And the thing that was interesting is that when we finally got it right, and we used a fiberglass reinforced plastic and we used oak trims, he quit doing it. And so many times we've done all of these measures, tempered glass windows and hardened walls and fiberglass doors, and Ronnie will come through and he'll test everything in the building, and then he never touches it again. You think, oh man, you just put it in for a while, and once it's been tested, you just walk away from it and we don't have to worry about it anymore. But it's because it's a reaction thing. I do this and that happens. And oftentimes people have very little control in their lives. And I think this happens very frequently with people with disability, that what they have control of is really limited. Oftentimes it ends up being us. But when they can control something, they tend to overdo what it is that they can control. And in Kyle's case, he was actually trying to make things perfect. So the first little imperfection, it was really not to make it worse, but then as it got worse, it just began to become an obsessive compulsive situation for him. And we figured out some incredible fabrics, ballistic nylon, and a kind of a Kevlar product that they actually use to make toys for gorillas. And he could not do the gorilla fabric on his bed. And it has enough texture to it that blankets and sheets and so forth will stay on it. So we keep finding, what you keep realizing is that there are technical solutions to most of these problems. And at the end of the day, it's about continuing to do that. It's not blaming Kyle. It was not Kyle's fault that he could pick that wall. That wasn't his fault. It was our fault that we couldn't come up with a solution to keep Kyle from eating his mattress. And there are technical solutions to those problems. We talked about some of the values, and one of the most important values that we go back to is that, how can you give people the most amount of control over their lives? And as they learn more control and exercise more, how do you keep upping the opportunities for them to do it? And so Kyle's bathroom really worked for Kyle. It really worked for Kyle. I mean, as you attend the later sessions and we talk about the autism-friendly environment, we'll talk about the essential bathroom. And this has all the qualities of the essential bathroom. It has the floor drain, tile floor, has a wall-hung toilet with the tank in the wall and a air actuator button for flushing the toilet, and the cast iron tub, fixtures that are extremely durable, tempered glass mirrors. So this is a bathroom that you could go into just short of having a hammer, and you're not really going to hurt this bathroom. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty good looking bathroom. And you know what? This bathroom works really well for Kyle. It works really well for Kyle because one of the things that Kyle needs is when he has difficulty controlling his emotions, he gets in the water. And he'll fill that bathtub up with hot water and just go for it. And just go for it. And again, it's back to some joy, but it also is a thing that helps moms and helps all of us because as the stress and the tension in that house go down, as they go down, everybody has a better life. Everybody has a better life. And one of the interesting stories is that Kyle hates toilet seats. So he won't leave the toilet seat on the toilet. But he won't use the toilet without the toilet seat. So he gives the toilet seat to his mom, and whenever he wants to use the toilet, he'll sign toilet, and his mom will give him the toilet seat, and he'll go into the bathroom, and he'll put the toilet seat on the toilet, and he'll use the toilet, and then he'll return the toilet seat to his mom. And you know, it's just interesting in terms of how people work their environments, but somehow that reality is important to Kyle. So does it matter? Does it matter that the toilet seat is permanently installed on that toilet? I don't really think it does. I think what really matters is Kyle has figured out a way to use that and to have a life that he has more control of. And if that's what it takes, I don't think that's a big deal. You provide opportunities for choice and control. And as people get more control of their lives, you've got to create opportunities for them to exercise it. And this is Ronnie and Ronnie's family. And his dad said to me, you know, with Ronnie, this is the way it is. You have to either intervene, you have to redirect, or you have to restrain. And that's how they live their lives. Because if Ronnie got into the bathroom by himself, he would tear the bathroom up. He would break the faucet. He would pull the shower curtain down. He would flood the bathroom. He'd move through the house. He would break holes in the walls. When I first visited his house, every window in the house was broken. Every window. So that's how it was. Dad was like this at Ronnie's elbow all the time. All the time. We went in and rethought the situation. We created spaces that made sense and worked for Ronnie. We made spaces that Ronnie couldn't damage. We gave Ronnie, you know, like Kyle, a suite of rooms that were really his rooms and that worked for him. And suddenly, the conversation began to shift because as he had more control in spaces that made sense for him and worked for him, with walls that he couldn't break, with refrigerators that he could have access to, no longer needed that. And so as he developed more capacity and more self-control, the environment opened up more and more possibilities and more opportunities for him to use it the way that he wanted. And it's back to those values once again, keeping him safe, helping people use the environment in a way that works for them. But it's got to go also to this idea that, you know what, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault. He was in a bad relationship with that kitchen. Person-centered environment to meet the needs of individuals reduces stress on everybody. And this is, you know, cannot overemphasize the importance of person-centered planning and that the environment needs to be at the table. I think about the environment as another member of the family. I mean, you wouldn't enter into a person-centered plan if the significant circle of supports weren't there. And one of the circles of supports for people should be the physical environment. It should be part of the conversation from the very beginning. And when you begin to build environments that make sense and work for people, how they want to live their lives, understanding what the challenges are that they face, whether it's trying to integrate sensory input that is just too much for them, or dealing with sound or light. It's like when you begin to understand what they need and what their sensitivities are and what the disabilities are, then you can then begin to make environments that make sense and work for them. And this is Colin's house once again, and these are ways of thinking about so in the state of Washington, they did a study and they said, okay, who are the people that are going into services? Who are people that are going into comprehensive services, go into crisis and end up in services? And what they figured out was it was people with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, co-occurring behaviors that included aggression, that in order to keep them safe, they had to be in sight and within earshot at all times, and caregivers wore out. Caregiver fatigue, right at the top. And when parents break down, when families break down, it doesn't work anymore. So all along, it's about saving steps. I'm not saying about, to keep people safe. If I have to keep an eye on you, then I have to do that. And I have to think creative ways of doing it. And we've figured out that there's something magic about aquariums. And somehow, remember, people I've worked with autism are sure that they can see you through the aquarium, but that you can't see them. And this is whole strategies about how you're able to keep an eye on people without necessarily intervening in their lives. And I can remember Anna's family really struggling with, Anna would go into her bedroom and close the door. Well, was she okay? And they'd try to listen at the door. But then if they went in the door, bang, then Anna was on to something else. And then she was back into their lives, and it had all come undone. They really struggled with privacy. And I think we all are. I mean, cameras and audio listening equipment is everywhere. So I think there's real judgment, exercise really good judgment about how you use those things. And do they make sense? Do you want a camera in your living room? What is it I need the camera to tell me? Maybe I need the camera to tell me when you've got out of bed. Maybe I need a sensor to tell me the front door opened at 2 o'clock in the morning. Or I maybe need to know that you've gone to the toilet 5 or 6 times in the night. Make me think that maybe you have a bladder infection. There's information that I need. I can take a look at what's going on with Colin through his house without having a camera on him. And the other thing? When Anna's in the bathroom, I don't need to worry about her. When Colin's in his bathroom, I don't need to worry about him because the bathroom is set up where we know he's going to be safe. He's doing the thing that he wants to do. He's not going to hurt the bathroom. So creating those safe zones for people, back to the brilliance of saying, this is a kind of an intervention. When you make a safe room where people can go and do the things that they want to do in the way that they want to do them, guess what? The stress for everybody really begins to come down. And it puts the power back in the hands of the people that we're supposedly trying to serve. Take a look at the environment, always from the perspective of the person who's going to use it. And this is Jessica's bathroom. And Jessica is a young woman who has pretty significant seizures. And her seizures are like wham, right down on her face. From just being like this to being on her face. And no defense. Her hands don't come out to protect her. No, she just goes down. And that had happened to her so often. She had broken her teeth, and you can just imagine falling on your face. So she kind of gave up being vertical on her own. It wasn't that she couldn't. It's just that the cost of landing on your face periodically was more than she could put up with. So she lived her life kind of on the floor. And she spent most of her time on her knees crawling around. And that was the way it was in the bathroom. So the bathroom didn't really work for her very well, conventional bathroom, because conventional bathrooms are designed for people that are walking around. But we took a look at the bathroom, and we created a bathroom scene, where everything happens on the floor. The floor is heated, the fauceting is down low, the grab bars are down low, the toilet is lower. It's like we took the world and we converted it to a world that made sense for her. And she's able to use the bathroom safely. It's like thinking about what is it the person needs, what is it the person wants to do, and then, you know what? It's actually a lot easier for me to change the physical environment, to modify it, than it is to think I'm going to change you, or that I should have the audacity to want to change your behavior necessarily. Because we've already figured out that problem behaviors are usually failures of environments. They're failures of environments. It's not the behavior itself. Behavior itself may be something that they need, like the bouncing on the furniture. It's the broken furniture that was the problem. And we want to set up situations where people can enjoy their lives and the physical environment can play a role in that. That's no replacement for staff, and I don't want to in any way put that out, but it should be a partner, and it shouldn't be ignored, and all too often it is ignored and it is undervalued. Again, remember the 4, I keep hammering you with the 4. If the environment doesn't work, it's not the person's fault. So this is a project we did in Bakersfield, California, a number of years ago for a little guy named Rasul. And Rasul at Prater-Willi, and which is really a very, very challenging syndrome, and he needed exercise, and so the family, was constantly trying to figure out ways to encourage him to exercise, and they did all these things in the backyard. They put up swing sets and sand pits and basketball hoops, and they put up weights, and it just got trashed. It just got trashed. The environment was really broken. And interestingly enough, a church group got involved and did this play area for Rasul. And there's a couple of things that we learned about this, and one of the really cool things in this project is this fence. So if you go to put up a fence, the code is going to say 6 foot, that's it. If you build a fence that's higher than 6 foot, you're in trouble. Well, 6 foot fence was like a joke. I mean, Rasul was over the fence and in the park, begging for chicken from everybody that he could meet, and was really successful at it. So you need a bigger fence, but you got this code problem. But you know what? Sports fences can be 17 foot tall. 17 foot. Can't get over the sports fence. You got to have a sports fence or else the basketball flies out of the yard. So they did a sports fence, and then they came in and they actually got some people to donate this material for that backyard. Now, is that like the coolest backyard you've ever seen? And guess what? The kids that never wanted to play with Rasul at school wanted to come home and play in Rasul's backyard. And when all these kids came around to play in Rasul's backyard, what was Rasul doing? He's playing in the backyard. So a change in this environment. I mean, was it Rasul's fault that didn't work? No. I mean, do we need that? Well, no, probably not. But what a cool thing that it happened. And it was about community in some ways, bringing it together. But for Rasul, at the end of the day, it was about a place that he could exercise. It was about having friends over and a yard to be in. So it wasn't Rasul's fault. That wasn't his fault. But what a wonderful opportunity. And what great lessons we were able to learn from that project. So here we go. The 4 key concepts that I wanted you to walk away with today. The people enter into relationships with their physical environments for better or for worse. The difference between a problem behavior and a preferred activity are the consequences. You cannot fix a problem behavior in a broken environment. And if the environment doesn't work, it is not the person's fault. Are we all on board with this? Did we do a good sales job? Thank you very much.